finishing up a series this morning in the Old Testament book of Jonah that we've called To Change a City. See, here's the idea. Inside of all of us is this person that desperately wants to change the world, right? And it starts inside of us young. I've got a 4-year-old who, when he grows up, desperately wants to be Spider-Man. And you laugh because this is you too, right? I mean, when you were growing up, think about all of the people that you admired the most, the people that you wanted to be like, your heroes when you were a kid. Weren't they people like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Iron Man, right? I mean, what's not cool about that? What's not cool about people like Scooby-Doo, or some of you that are a little older, the A-Team, or the Lone Ranger, right? The people that we looked back at, the people that we looked up to, the people we wanted to be like in our lives were the people who changed the world. And yet we grow out of that, right? At least we grow out of admitting that publicly. But we still got this thing inside of us that thinks that maybe God could use somebody like me to change the world, right? I mean, if you don't believe me, just get on Facebook for a week and look at the bajillion different causes that your friends will beg you to like or to share, with the promise that if you'll just click a button, somebody's life could be different forever. See, we suppress this desire to wear our underwear on the outside of our pants and shoot spider webs out of our fingers. And yet somewhere buried inside of every single one of us is this person that still believes that God could use somebody like me, God could use people like us to change a world. And I believe, you don't have to believe this, but I believe that's a desire that God has put into every single one of us, because He's a God who's in the business of changing the world. And He wants to use people like you, churches like us, to make a difference and to be a part of this thing that He's about. But what happens to us? Because the truth is, most of us would have to admit, when it comes to changing the world, most of us are on the sidelines. Very few of us really expect, to be eulogized as world changers, right? We've been following Jonah's story over the past several weeks because he was a guy that God used to change a city. And we followed his story through the really important, familiar parts. And yet there's part of the story that we haven't seen. This morning we're going to look at the unfamiliar part of Jonah's story. So if you have a Bible this morning, go ahead and turn to Jonah chapter 4. And if you don't have a Bible, grab one that looks like mine and turn to page 646 this morning, as we finish up the story and see what it is in Jonah, but also the thing that I believe is inside of all of us that battles with our inner desire to change the world. The thing that's most responsible for most of us sitting on the sidelines instead of changing the world. We'll be in Jonah chapter 4 this morning. Let me remind you where we left off. Jonah went to the city God called him to go against his greater wishes, and he preaches a message to the people of Nineveh. He says, you're about to be destroyed if you don't turn to God. And the people of Nineveh say, you're right. And so they begin to change their minds, and they begin to change their behavior. And not only that, they take Jonah's message and Jonah's picture, and they begin to tell all of their friends about it. And one person hears the message and goes to his friend, and his friend begins to go to all of their friends, and they respond, and they go to their friends and their friends and their friends. And finally, the king of Nineveh responds. And he issues a decree for all of the people. He says, let all of the people take sackcloth and put it on. That was what slaves wore. And it was incredibly itchy and uncomfortable. And that was the point. You put something on that's uncomfortable so that every time you feel uncomfortable, you remember what you're supposed to be feeling uncomfortable about. And the king says to the people, put on the sackcloth and mourn. Who knows what God will do? But not only that, don't eat anything. Not only you, but your pets, your livestock, your animals, they don't eat anything either. Let's just be hungry for a while. And the idea is the same. When you're uncomfortable, when you're hungry, it's all you can think about, isn't it? And the whole idea is when you realize, man, I'm really uncomfortable. I'm starving here. You're supposed to remember to pray and to allow that discomfort to drive you towards the God that you're supposed to be chasing after. And the king says to the people, let's be uncomfortable for a while and see what God might do in us, what he might do through us. Let's just allow ourselves to be uncomfortable for a little while. And all of the people respond, which is every pastor's dream. You realize that, right? I mean, you preach a message, and it is so convicting to the people that they can't wait to tell all of their friends about it. And the picture is so clear that their friends can't wait to tell their friends and their friends to their friends, and everybody responds to the message. And I just got to tell you, as a pastor, if I ever preach one of those sermons, and we ever have one of those moments, and my autobiography is written like Jonah's autobiography is written for us to see, that's going to be the climax of the story. Okay, that's going to be that part at the end of the movie where the music begins to swell and the tears come to everybody's eyes and they know, okay, this is the point. If everybody could just preach like Jonah, if everybody could just preach like Freeland, this world would be a different place. But you know, that's not the way this story ends. That's not even the climax of Jonah's story. That's the climax of the Jonah story that most of us are familiar with. But that's not the point. See, if that's where Jonah's story had ended, we would think that was the point. We would think that it was a story about Jonah. But the point of Jonah's story was not to tell us the story of Jonah. It wasn't to tell us the story of Nineveh. It was to tell people in Jonah's day the story of them. And to tell people in our day the story of us. And the way the story ends asks us and answers a really important question that every one of us who read Jonah's story should ask about ourselves. It answers a question first, and the question that it answers is, why aren't there a whole lot of stories like Nineveh's story? Why didn't what happened in Nineveh happen all over the world? Why didn't what happened in Nineveh happen in Fort Worth? But at the end of the story, it leaves us, all of us, with a question that Jonah got to answer, that he invites us to answer as well. Look at the story. Nineveh repents. And rather than celebrating, look at how Jonah responds, beginning in verse 1 of Jonah chapter 4. Nineveh repents, and God doesn't bring this destruction. But to Jonah, this seemed very wrong. And he became angry. Literally, it was to him a great evil. He prayed to the Lord, "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That's what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew you were a good, gracious, and compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live." We saw this the first week. Jonah didn't believe that God was good enough to be trusted with the Ninevites. He didn't feel like they deserved mercy or grace. And Jonah goes to God after Ninevite receives mercy and grace, and he says to God, "God, I knew you could not be trusted with the Ninevites. I knew you were weak. And if they turned to you, you'd show them compassion. I knew you couldn't be trusted." God responds, verse 4. But the Lord replied, "Is it right for you to be angry?" See, God sees what we see. after reading the whole story. The thing that Jonah temporarily recognized in the fish. What was the Ninevites' problem? They were about to die. What was Jonah's problem in the middle of the fish? Jonah was about to die. Why were the Ninevites about to die? Well, because they had turned and run away from the God who created them. Why was Jonah about to die in the fish? Because he had turned and run away from the God who had created them. And what did the Ninevites realize when God gave them compassion? They realized where to turn for life. What did Jonah realize in the fish? He realized where to turn for life. Jonah and the Ninevites have the exact same story. Jonah is living his life, experiencing the same grace and compassion that he is angry with God for giving to the Ninevites. He's forgotten everything that he learned, and he's right back where he started, telling God that he would rather die in the middle of nowhere than for someone else to experience the grace he'd received. What happened to him? Well, sometimes when you get ready to say something really hard to people, you tell them a story. And that's what God does for Jonah. In fact, he gives him an object lesson. Look at verses 5 and 6. Jonah had gone out, sat down at a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter, sat in its shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. See, Jonah still thinks there's an off chance that maybe these people might get what's coming to them. So he makes a shade, and it doesn't totally keep him comfortable from the sun, but it's at least something temporary. Verse 6, God provides something even better. God provided a leafy plant and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head, to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. This is the first time in the whole story that Jonah's been happy. Why is he happy? Because God provides a plant to ease his discomfort. Now, there's a lot that you can read about this plant, and people have gone over to this area of the world to try to find plants that grow really fast and have broad leaves so that we could know exactly what kind of plant. You know what? That's the same as looking after the kind of fish that Jonah was in. In fact, this passage uses the exact same word. God provided a fish. God provided a plant. There are plants in the Middle East that grow incredibly quickly, but there are no plants that grow overnight. This is a plant that God provided for Jonah as a miraculous act of his grace to ease his discomfort. And Jonah is happy. Why is Jonah happy? Because he's the recipient of God's grace and he's comfortable. He's got personal relief. And that's really important to this story. But his comfort's short-lived. Look at verse 7. At dawn the next day, God provided, there's that word again, a worm, which chewed the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God provided, there's that word, a scorching east wind. And the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, "It would be better for me to die than to live." Do you see what's going on in the story? Jonah's comfortable. Jonah's happy. Jonah's uncomfortable. Jonah wants nothing else to do with God or God's purpose or God's plan. When Jonah's uncomfortable, he's ready to die. But the whole deal isn't about a plant. And God wants to make sure that Jonah knows the connection. Jonah says the same thing to God that he said when God gave mercy to the Ninevites. He said, I just can't take it. I want to die. Look at verse 9. God says to Jonah the same thing. Is it right for you to be angry about the plant? It is, he said. And I am so angry, I wish I were dead. Jonah says, God, this is not what I signed up for when I signed up to follow you. This is not what I wanted. What I wanted when I signed up to follow you was for you to make me comfortable. What I wanted when I signed up to follow you was for somebody to provide me all of my wants and all of my needs. What I wanted when I signed up to follow you is I wanted someone to use me in the exact place, with the exact people, in the exact way that I wanted someone to use me. What I wanted, God, when I signed up to work is I wanted someone supernatural to accomplish my will for life and my will for this world. And God, it is right for me to be angry. And God, if you love me and you have the power to make my life comfortable and you choose not to do that, I'd rather die. Because comfort is what I expect from you, God. If you're not going to do that, I'd rather die than serve you. Because I signed up for comfort. And that's what I expect out of you, God. You see the irony here in this story? At this very moment in the story, the most evil people on the face of the planet throughout world history are sitting around in sackcloth, starving to death, uncomfortable because they're running after the God who created them, while God's representative, God's prophet, is sitting on the ground ready to be killed because he would rather die than be uncomfortable following God. God responds to Jonah. Verse 10. But the Lord said, "You've become concerned about this plant. Though you did not tend it or make it grow, it sprang up overnight and died overnight." Jonah, let's get things in perspective here. When you think your life is over because of a plant, and you didn't till the soil, you didn't plant the seed, you didn't cultivate the growth, and this is a plant, Jonah, that you've only had less than 24 hours to grow attached to. A random plant sprung up overnight, and your whole identity is tied up in it to the point you'd rather die than lose that plant. Do I have that right, Jonah? Jonah, yeah, that's about it. Well, God goes for the clincher, verse 11. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who can't tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? Jonah, I did cultivate the plant. I did make it grow. I did prepare the soil. I did cause it to spring up over you to give you comfort. But you see that city out there? Jonah, in that city are people that I formed in their mother's womb, that I created in my image. And 120,000 of them, probably infants and children, who don't even know their left hand from their right hand. And a whole bunch of animals that are just as helpless as your little plant. I've got a bit more invested in them than you ever had in a plant, Jonah. So let's analyze our concern. Let's consider our compassion. And Jonah, let's talk about who has the right to be angry here. God makes Jonah's issue really clear, doesn't he? I mean, hasn't this been Jonah's problem all along? When it really comes down to it, the only thing Jonah has ever cared about is his own personal comfort. At the very beginning of the story, when the Ninevites threatened his personal comfort, he wanted them fixed. When he's thrown into the ocean and he finds his personal comfort threatened, he wants relief. When he's inside the fish, he wants out. And when he's sitting in the sun, he wants shade. And when the shade goes away, Jonah says, kill me. If I can't be comfortable, I'd rather be dead. And then the book ends. You don't see Jonah's response. You don't hear Jonah's apology. Because if you'd seen Jonah's response, you would have missed the point. You would have thought the story was about Jonah. But it's not a story about Jonah. It's a story about you and me. And at the end of the book, the question isn't, how did Jonah respond? The question is, how will I respond? How will you respond? We implicitly know how Jonah responds. He wrote the book. And he doesn't paint himself in a very good light. He's the only person that could have known the details of what he prayed and what he said inside the book. We know how he responds, but that's not the question. The question he leaves us with is, how will we respond to the same exact question Jonah got to answer? And his whole life set us up for it. Here's the question. If you're taking notes, you can write it down there. Am I consumed by compassion for others or by comfort for myself? Am I consumed by compassion for others or by comfort for myself? Isn't that the question that Jonah leaves us with? The question that he got to answer? Friends, let me push really hard on you for a minute. Isn't that the question that we need to answer as people, as a church? What's more likely to ruin your day? Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people around you who are dying, or that you're uncomfortable? What's more likely to cause us to walk away from our faith, to walk away from our God, or just simply to walk away from a church? The fact that we're no longer comfortable, the fact that that church isn't doing enough to live into God's heart of compassion. Isn't that why most of us aren't changing the world? Isn't this the reason that Jonah shows us? It makes us uncomfortable. I mean, it would make us uncomfortable to be a part of what God's doing most of the time in our world. At least that's our fear. It might affect our social calendar, our bank account, our relationships, or our hobby, or our reputation, or our dignity. It might affect our golf handicap, the fall television lineup, or our ability to sit in a church and consume religious goods and services unbothered by their implications on my life. Isn't that what keeps us, most of us, from changing the world? See, here's the bottom line for Jonah. It's the bottom line for us. If you don't remember anything else from this series or from this book, remember this bottom line. When our chief concern is different from God's chief concern, it should concern us. When our chief concern when the thing that rocks our world, when the thing that ruins our day, when the thing that we lay awake at night thinking about, when that is different from God's chief concern, man, it should concern us. Here's what this doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that if you trust Him, He will consistently make your life miserable, right? I mean, that's what a lot of us fear, is that if we really went all in and we said to God, okay, God, I'm going to trust you with everything, that He would make our life so miserable and so uncomfortable that it would be better for us to just be dead, and so we sit on the sidelines. But you know what? The opposite is the case. See, here's the absolute beauty in Jonah's story and in our story, is that God's concern for others is a reminder of His concern for us. Isn't that what you see page after page in Jonah's story, verse after verse in Jonah's story? Is that every place God calls Jonah, Jonah gets a reminder of who he is and who his God is and what his God has done for him. God's call for Jonah to go out there allowed God to do something for Jonah in here. Don't miss that. That's so important for us as individuals and as a church. Isn't it true? A lot of times we talk, even just as a church, about engaging our world. We talk about community groups, which are environments designed around helping people engage their world out there as we're growing in community. We talk about Servolution. We talk about engaging 40,000 people in a 5-mile radius of McKinney who haven't decided to follow Jesus yet. And sometimes that kind of talk and that kind of emphasis gets us really uncomfortable, doesn't it? Because we think there's this thing inside of us that begins to rise up and we say, wait. If all we're doing is focusing on the people out there, what about the people in here? What about me? But here's the beauty of the story. Here's the beauty of Jonah's story. At the back end of the story, we find out that God called Jonah out there because He wanted to do something in here. He called Jonah to love someone else because He wanted to love Jonah. And He wanted to show Jonah something about His holiness, something about His goodness, something about His righteousness, something about His grace, something about His power that Jonah never, ever, ever would have seen if Jonah had just stayed comfortable. The beauty of a call and an emphasis to go there is what in the process of going there, God can do here. Let me ask you a question. Then I'll get out of your business and let you go to lunch. Friends, is it possible that God has a greater purpose for your life than your own personal comfort? Is it possible, church, is it possible that God has a greater purpose for having you here than just providing a place where you can consume religious goods and services and get more information? Is it possible that He has you here to be developed for the purpose of being a part of something bigger for your world, bigger for your city, and yes, bigger for you? Is it possible He wants you to be developed to change a city, to change a world? Is it possible God has a greater purpose for your life than your own personal comfort? Is it possible that He's calling you to step out of something comfortable, to trust Him, that He'll provide for you out there? I can give you something practical. At McKinney Church, we talk a lot to community groups about multiplying, about creating space for other relationships, and that's uncomfortable. Maybe it is that you're a child, or you're a student, or you're a college student, or you're an adult, or you're a senior adult, and someone has asked you to hold a program with a really open hand at McKinney Church. Is it possible that God is asking you to step out of the shade he's provided? Your group is nice. It's comfortable. It feels great. There's nothing wrong with your program. We did away with all of the programs that there was something wrong with a long time ago. There's nothing wrong with your program. But is it possible that maybe God is calling you to step out of the shade he's provided and trust him that he can provide shade for you again? Is it possible he's got a greater purpose for your life, for this church, than your own personal comfort, that he wants to use you? He wants to use us to change the world. McKinney Church, I believe God's put us on the map at this time and in this place for that purpose. In fact, if you look around, it's hard to imagine all of this construction that's around McKinney. Do you notice this? You notice when you look around and you drive down Hewlin and you sit in traffic, or you drive down 20 and you sit in traffic, or you drive down 183, or you sit on Arbalon, or you sit on Bryant Irvin, and there's traffic. It's all construction. Do you realize what God's doing? God is, this is what I believe, paving the way for McKinney Church to go to the city. Not to be the best church in the community where we just hope to have all of the bells and whistles and all of the comfortable things so that all of the people from the other churches decide to start coming to our church. That's not what we're about as a church. We want to be the best church for our community. And friends, every time you sit in traffic on Hewlin, every time you sit in traffic on 20, every time you sit in traffic on 183 or on Arbalon or on Bryant Irvin, thank God for the opportunity that he's about to put in front of us. I believe God's put us here for such a time as this. It's not going to be comfortable. It's not going to be easy. If it was easy, we would have done it a long time ago. But when those streets are complete in 2014, we're going to be a church that's ready to take a consistent picture and a clear message of who Jesus is and what he's done to the city. Yeah, it'll be uncomfortable. Yeah, it could mean sacrifice. Yeah, it could mean that some of us will run away. But I believe that's what God's put us here for. In fact, do you know that's the reason McKinney Church was planted? In fact, in 2014, McKinney Church will be 60 years old. And we buried one of the founders of McKinney Church this last Thursday, Sue Garrison. And at her memorial service, the very first full-time pastor at McKinney, Wendell Johnston, stood up and talked about how he came to McKinney Church to begin with. Professor Howard Hendricks was the very first pastor at McKinney Church. He did it on a part-time basis. And he saw Wendell Johnston walking across the campus of Dallas Seminary and asked him to come over and sit on a bench. And he said to Wendell Johnston, how would you like to be a part of a church with the potential for changing the map of spirituality in Fort Worth, Texas? 60 years ago. And Dr. Johnson said he came over to McKinney Church and met with a group of people, Bill and Sue Garrison, and some of you that are in this room today were sitting at that table. And those people began to unfold a vision of a different kind of church that could change a city. And Dr. Johnston said this past Thursday, he said, they believed it. And I believed them. And that's why I came to McKinney. Because it was a church that believed it could change a city. That's why we're here. Because of people with vision like that. And listen to me. My greatest fear as your pastor is that we're a church that's outgrown that. That we're a church that's decided that was childlike faith of people 60 years ago. But we're bigger now. We'd rather be comfortable. mean, they were uncomfortable. Get one of them sometime to tell you a story about climbing all of the stairs to the top of Herbie's sandwich shop and just the beating it was to do church and struggling through financially and trying to make it. They were uncomfortable, but they believed it was worth it because God was at work through their life. Guys, my greatest fear as a church is that we'll outgrow that and get to a place where we're just consumers who love to be comfortable. I want to be a part of changing the world, changing the city, because I believe in a God who's at work and wants to provide us with shade if we'll trust him. Stephanie's going to come out and sing a song. It's a prayer of a person that realizes that they've lived life as a person who's comfortable. A person who recognizes something about the God that they serve and about themselves, that they knew all the stories, they knew all the songs, but they never stopped to think about what the stories and the songs requested of them. And in the process, thinking through all of these things, recognized something about the God they served. And as she sings, I want you to think. I want you to listen to these words and ask whether or not this might need to be your prayer this morning. Of a person who's lived life where your crucial concern was comfort. And if maybe on a morning like this, God's calling you to something greater. Let's listen.
I made you promises 1,000 times. I tried to hear from heaven, but I talked the whole time. I think I made you too small. I never feared you at all, no. If you touched my face, would I know you? Looked into my eyes, could I behold you? Spoke me into motion, wherever I even stood, but the shore along your ocean. Are you fire? Are you fury? Are you sacred? Are you beautiful? What do I know? What do I know of holy? I thought that I had figured you out. I knew all the stories, and I'd learned to talk about how you were mighty to save. But those were only empty words on a page, and then I caught a glimpse of who might be. The slightest hint of you brought me down to my knees. What do I know of you? Who spoke me into motion? Wherever I even stood, but the shore along your ocean. Are you fire? Are you fury? Are you sacred? Are you beautiful? So what do I know? What do I know of holy? my shame of the God who gave life its name. What do I know fully of the one whom the angels praise? All creation knows your name. On earth and heaven above, what do I know of this love? What do I know of you who spoke me into motion? Wherever I even stood, not the shore along your ocean. Are you fire? Are you fury? Are you sacred? Are you beautiful? Lord, what do I know? What do I know of holy? What do I know of
And what about us? At the end of each of these messages, we've invited you to do something, to take a step during the week. This morning, I want to invite you to take a step here before you even leave. I want to ask you as we begin to sing, would you begin to pray? God, am I concerned about the things that concern you? And if I'm not, how can I run towards you? Say, God, I give you permission to make me uncomfortable if it'll help me to know more of who you are. Would you pray that? And would you commit to take a step? Whatever the step is that he calls you to this week. But to have a heart that says, you know what? I'd rather be uncomfortable in running towards God than comfortable in running away. As an individual, as a church, if it means running towards his concern, I'll be uncomfortable. That's me. If that's you, as we begin to sing this song, would you stand? Would you just stand in that moment and sing with us? Don't do something that you don't mean. Don't do something religious. Don't do something hypocritical. If that's not your heart, don't stand up. Nobody's going to judge you for being honest at McKinney Church. And maybe you would stand up another week, another day. But this morning, if that's your heart, as we sing these words, would you say, God, I'm willing to be uncomfortable in my house if that's what it means to follow you. I'm willing to be uncomfortable in this church if that's what it means to follow you. In my neighborhood, in my city, at my workplace, I'm willing to be uncomfortable if it means following you. If that's your heart as we sing, would you pray? And then would you stand?